Okay, welcome everyone. We're in our last 2020 All Hands for Tech for Campaigns. For those of you I don't know, Jessica Alter, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tech for Campaigns. We're excited to see a bunch of people on this call. Looks like Houston, New York City, Stratford, Sacramento. Do we have anywhere else that's exciting? A couple Los Angeles, Pittsburgh. How about North Carolina? Do we have any North Carolina or Michigan people that have joined? Because we have, yes, there we go. Because we have Representative-elect Christine Morse and DeAndrea Salvador who have joined us to very recent flips in those states. So I know that we are excited and I'm grateful that they're here. I'll go through a little bit about Tech for Campaigns and what we saw happen in 2020 with Greg Dale, our head of campaign relations, and then we'll hear from both representative-elects and also Dylan Holmes, who ran texting across all of TFC, and then we'll leave time for a little bit of QA. So without further ado, next slide. Okay. Oh, we're starting here. Okay. I think, sorry, DeAndrea is senator-elect, so my fault. We have a lot of TFC candidates, so I get tripped up sometimes. But I think on the news front, many of you might have seen comments from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Beto O'Rourke talking about the Democrats' need to up their game on digital and tech. These are some of the comments. There was a whole interview in the New York Times, and there's been a debate which seems sort of a conflation of issues about whether or not this is the problem or the issues that are getting discussed are the problem. And I think it'll be interesting to hear from our candidates in a bit, but our take, and I think it's important that everyone in the community understands this, is those are two totally separate topics. Whether or not you are talking about defund the police or not, whether or not you're talking about the Green New Deal or not, is separate from whether or not in 2020 you should have a really strong tech and digital game and capacity. And you can talk about both of those, but conflating them is really doing a disservice. And there should be no debate in 2020 when people spend 7 to 8 hours a day online, minimum, probably more with COVID, whether or not this should be a strong capacity. And this is, why TFC exists, to fill this hole, to be a lasting tech and digital arm for the Democrats. I think it's just important that everyone understand that. We've responded a couple times on Twitter, but I think as part of the TFC community, you want to make sure you understand that. So we're happy to take more questions on that later. What are we working on? So we'll talk a little bit in a second about results, but what we're working on right now, if you've been part of a campaign, you've probably been doing wrap-ups. Internally, we also do actually a full state report for everything that went on in that state, and not only our readout about what went on, but recommendations, and then postmortems, which are really deep dives into every vein of digital, texting, ads, email, and that will include our vote by mail effort this year, into what worked, what didn't work, what we saw globally. Those actually take into 2021, partially because there's so much work and partially because the voter file with updated information doesn't always get published until then. So I know there's volunteer teams and full-time people working on that. And that's a huge effort. You can see our reports from 2018 and 2019 on the footer of the website. They're usually referenced in press pretty frequently. Second, I'll just preempt the question about Georgia. We are looking at getting involved in Georgia. I think one of the things, and we'll talk about this in a second, that we didn't do a great job of this year is setting expectations. This is a long-term game, our strategy. And I think like Texas is one example. When we got in 2018, we didn't think we would flip it in 2020. And so we don't feel as, bummed about it as others do. And we think it's like a 3 to 4 cycle flip. And we know that Republicans have been at this for 15 years and we don't feel deterred about it. But I think Georgia is an uphill battle. And importantly, there's a lot of money going in. Probably too much money, to be just really honest. And so if we get in, we want to make sure that it's high ROI for everyone's time and money. And so we're evaluating getting in both on our full-time team and helping with the vote by mail effort there, which seems most likely, and also helping with technology tools and on the volunteer side. So we don't have any news yet, but we will update you as soon as we make decisions. And then Virginia 2021, those conversations have actually already started. Virginia's a 2021 election, and we helped flip it last year. We're also talking with several states about ongoing work there so that we don't have to build back up with all the campaigns in late 2022. And all of that plus strategic planning. So as I just said to Rob, our Michigan State Director, like it's very busy. It's just a little bit less intense than, the 6 weeks before an election. So lots going on, figuring out a lot, and definitely busy. Let's talk a little bit about what happened as election results. And Greg will join me in talking about this. So the way the way that we think about things is in sort of verticals. So talent, which is the volunteer side, we helped with 120 state legislative campaigns, and we had some pretty big flips. 2 of them are with us tonight in North Carolina, Michigan, Alaska. I think there's a recount going on, but the closest race seems to be Liz Snyder in Alaska, who's up by 16 votes. Which is pretty incredible. And then another 103 campaigns where we weren't working with them on the volunteer side, but they used our tech tools. And our vote by mail effort, which was on the independent side, and registered, not just registered, had 272,000 new voter ballots submitted through vote by mail. That's in Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania. And that was a fully digital effort from finding them to registering them to helping them, making sure they voted. So huge impact. I think additional numbers about the impact that we've had. Next slide, please. $750,000 raised just through email programs that our volunteers ran, which is incredible. 138 million ad impressions and 1 million text messages, 66 websites built. So those are all great numbers. Again, we'll know more after the postmortem. I think Representative-elect Morse, I believe you're the first Democrat to hold your seat. Is that right?
As far as I know.
Okay. Well, we're going to go with what you know.
I've tried to look back into history, and I'm not sure. I'm going to research it so I can tell you for sure. But I can tell you since at least the 90s, definitely. I'm not, but we're redistricted here and there. But right. As far as I know, yes.
Okay. And then also the first openly LGBTQ female in the Pennsylvania House. So a bunch of firsts, and I think importantly, a lot of defense that were very successful that ended up being very close. And maybe Greg can talk a little bit about what we saw with turnout and why it was more holding the line.
On the next slide. So Well, Biden obviously won. That's a good thing. Took a little longer than people wanted it to, but it happened. But what happened instead at the sort of U.S. Congress and state legislative level, we saw more mixed results. It turned out to be more of the what we call the hold the line year. And there's a couple contributors to that that seem apparent so far. Like we won't know for sure until the voter files are out in the first quarter next year. But what we can tell for now is that from basically from 2016 to 18, Democrats turned out in force in a lot of different places in U.S. House districts and state House districts, state Senate districts, all over the country. And Republicans really didn't. And that was a sign of the enthusiasm Democrats had, the blue wave of 2018. And they flipped a lot of districts at all levels. From 18 to 20, what we saw was sort of the return, the Empire Strikes Back a little bit. A lot of those districts had been at least purple or light red. And Trump was able to turn out a lot of low propensity Republicans in 2020 that skipped 2018. And that was enough to sort of, basically flip some back, flip some blue, flip some red, hold it basically netted out to, a little bit of stasis, despite all of our hopes that, we would continue to see additional chambers flipped and additional seats flipped at large scale. But it's important to remember that a lot of these districts that we're talking about here started off 2016 as Republican held. When 2018 came along and Democrats had a strong enthusiasm, the ones that they won were going to be the ones that basically were the sort of some of the easiest to grab at, which makes Christine and DeAndrea's achievements even more notable. But now in a year where that energy has already presented itself, expecting to continue that on a linear basis is, turned out to not be the case. But it's still important, I think, to recognize that we've made, especially at the state legislative level, really great strides since where we were in 2016, where I think Jessica will know the stat, it was like 1,000 seats have been lost in the prior 10 years. And we're in a much better position over if you zoom out a few cycles than we were, even though in our hearts of hearts, you want to keep seeing the wins rack up.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think it's important to just be thinking about this long term. Of course, you want to see progress made each year. Sometimes that doesn't always come across in wins or in the number of wins that you want. But if you look at 2016 versus 2020 Dem versus GOP, in almost all states, the votes that Dems got increased at a much had a much bigger increase. But as Greg already said, in most of these districts, Republicans were already ahead, plus they did turn out. So it just wasn't enough this year. But if this keeps going, then we're very, very optimistic. So that's part of the story there. I think also, just as a reminder, and it's okay to, I've heard someone say we were bummed, like, yeah, it's okay to be bummed. I think the term we're using is like disappointed, but not deterred. This is a long-term play. I think one of the things that Republicans do really well is think long-term. And then also, just understand, like in places like Texas and even in Michigan, like it's been a long time since we've been able to flip it. So just because we go in for a cycle or two and can't doesn't mean we give up. It means that as long as we see progress, we keep pushing at it. Pulling out of places where we didn't win is how we got into the predicament that we're in 2016. So we really try to look at several cycles out to make sure that we're helping in places that are on the come up and have a chance. Greg, anything to add?
That's it.
Cool. Next slide. People love you guys. I think that's what this slide shows. This is just some of the praise that we've gotten about the volunteer teams and the staff from candidates across the country. And we just want you guys to know that this pretty much pours in on a regular basis right now. So be proud of what you've done, and we're certainly grateful for it. I think with that, T, who is State Director for North Carolina, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jessica. Wanted to talk about DeAndrea Salvador, which we had the pleasure of working with in this election cycle. As Jessica mentioned, DeAndrea is a senator-elect for District 39, North Carolina. This is actually a redrawn district, and it was a Republican who held the seat. And DeAndrea was able to win, which is really great for North Carolina State Senate. Just a little bit about DeAndrea. She is a fifth-generation Charlatan. She's an entrepreneur and a founder of two amazing organizations that are focused on energy efficiency and sustainability in her area, in her district. In this election cycle, she ran on a couple of issues that she really strongly believes in, and I think a lot of us can relate to, predominantly in strengthening infrastructure for her community and district. She also supports teachers to be paid a fair living wage and also affordable healthcare. So we had the pleasure of working with DeAndrea on two projects with TFC. If you want to move to the next slide. The two projects that we worked with DeAndrea on is, first one has been her website. We built a nice mobile-friendly website for her that's optimized for search. The second project that we worked on with DeAndrea is email marketing. She had great teams of volunteers for both these projects. On the email marketing front, DeAndrea was able to really engage with her user base. Her users were very, very engaged. She had one of the best open rates across all our campaigns and candidates in North Carolina. The average open rates that we were seeing for DeAndrea's campaign was around 22%, which is really, really high. And the other thing to note as well is that despite a smaller list size than some of our other campaigns, the average donation was very high for DeAndrea, around $100. So we really enjoyed partnering with DeAndrea, and we are really, really excited that she was able to win her seat this year.
And with that,
Yeah. I was like, should I go? Yeah, no. Thank you so much.
Sorry, DeAndrea.
No, it's fine. Thanks, y'all. So again, my name is Senator-elect DeAndrea Newman Salvador, and I'm going to do something a little different. I think all campaign trail is nothing but giving a stump about me, but I want to give a little time to give a stump about Tech for Campaigns, really because you all stepped in two really crucial points of my election and provided just such valuable support. And actually, I almost feel like budding friendships. Like I can totally see myself continuing to interact and talk to the teams that I got to know. As you saw, we had the email as well as the website support. So one of the things about me running for office is that this was not a long-term plan for me. North Carolina had some of the worst gerrymandered districts in the entire country. And because of court orders, we had a redistricting process that essentially released our maps about a year ago. And just a couple weeks after seeing the new maps, talking to friends and family in my community, I made a decision to run. So the process of deciding to run and being elected has not even been 12 months for me. So it's been a really quick paced and remarkable journey. And having early supporters like Tech for Campaigns made all the difference, because you quickly learn that you need some key things like a well-functioning website. People need to find what you're about. They need to be able to get in contact with you. And though, despite my best efforts to put together a very simple Squarespace site, it just wasn't enough. And so I immediately saw that once we did the website upgrade, that we were getting more emails, we were seeing more engagement. We had a integrated way for people to sign up for NGP and get involved and grow our mailing list. It immediately had a great impact, and it was easy for me to also maintain. And then in terms of the email marketing, also starting up new, my team is relatively small and we were juggling a million things. So we were writing emails, we were talking to people, we're doing Zooms. I am a mom of 2 children and I do also work full time. So it's like a million things that you're trying to do and be effective. So to know that there are these incredible individuals all across the country, and some even in the state of North Carolina here with me, that were willing to put in the time to work with us to hone in our voice, get our message across, do it in a way that was resonating with the people who were on the list. Because starting out new, I will say most of the people were just friends, family, people in the community, people that just knew me. And so for them to be able to get the emails that Tech for Campaigns was working on and not say, what is this? This doesn't sound anything like DeAndrea would say, I think really just spoke to the dedication and the care that Tech for Campaigns just put into the work that I so tremendously appreciate. And so with all that said, I know that we have a long way to go. As Jessica mentioned, this is the long game. We held seats in my case and other cases, we flipped seats, but we have to, one, for all the folks who will be serving, like myself, keep our eye on the ball of redistricting and making sure we are fighting as fiercely and as hard as we can for fair districts that truly represent the people of the states that we're serving, but that we're also looking ahead at other states that will be having elections next year, at our own states that may be having elections in 2022, and thinking forward about what can we be doing to partner, build together our stakeholders, our coalitions, and really put forth meaningful change. So in the Q&A, if anybody is curious about me, I'm happy to go on about that, but I wanted to more so use my 5 minutes or so to just really highlight Tech for Campaigns, and also say I really tremendously appreciate you all, because I also work in the tech industry. So I previously founded a nonprofit, but I'm currently working for a startup that is venture backed. So I have that also, just the familiarity of knowing how you all are working intensely in some really incredible companies, and then taking your free time and doing this really great stuff. So just appreciate you all, and happy to answer any questions at the end of the program.
I think you're our first candidate who's also a product manager. I think that is a distinction that you own. So
I think we did determine that in June.
yeah.
Yeah.
and still are only. Awesome. We're going to open it up for questions to Senator-elect and Representative-elect as soon in a minute, but I want to hand it over to Rob or Greg to introduce.
Greg, hello. So I wanted to introduce Representative-elect Christine Morse and some background on Christine. Christine flipped the #1 flip opportunity in the Michigan State House and became, like I said, at the top, the first Democrat elected in quite a while at a minimum. Kind of something notable about Christine is it became the most expensive state house race in Michigan, as we'll walk into or walk through in a second, and we're really, I guess, glad to see it win and all that great stuff. So on the next slide, we can kind of see the evolution a little bit. I remember talking to Christine about her website, I think in, I don't know, it was like January or something. So it's been like a 12-ish month journey with her as the campaign ramped up, and starting with the website, building out a more complete, feature-rich, contentful site that worked well on mobile, and then moving into digital advertising, where we added Facebook and Google and Snapchat and lots of other fun things you'll see on the next slide. On the next slide. There we go. And I think the kind of tale of the story of the metrics where I think when it started, it was like we were talking about $1,200 and trying to figure out who would find the $1,200 to start, running advertising, and, what couch could we look under to do that. And then it became $4,000. And then by the end, it was $75,000, and running across Facebook, Google, connected TV, Snapchat, even Outbrain. And we're really glad to see it pay off, and glad to see the win. So with that, I will introduce Representative-elect Morse.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. I'm thrilled to be here talking to you tonight as a winner of the 61st District. I am Christine Morse. That's in Kalamazoo County on the west side of Michigan. It was the top seat to flip in 2020 because in 2018 it went for Governor Whitmer by 55% of the vote, and it actually went for Hillary Clinton in 2016. So people definitely knew there was an opportunity here. So I did get in about 17 months before the election, raised some money, but in early 2020, I found myself without any campaign staff. And my website had been started, but it was just not where it needed to be. So we got hooked up with Tech for Campaigns, had a great team that time. They were so collaborative. They really wanted to, show who I was as a person and as a candidate. I think our website is amazing. I got so many compliments on it. Just very happy and very, just really reflected who I was as a person, or who I am. So was super grateful for that. Fast forward a couple months, I got myself a manager, and we actually engaged Tech for Campaigns to take the lead on our digital campaign. So as you can see, we ended up raising a lot of money. And I'm sure Tech for Campaigns only helped that because, so many people were exposed locally across the state of Michigan to our campaign. So I don't think, it was fairly regular for me to be out in public and have I'd be knocking doors in September and a kid would say, "Are you Christine Morse?" And yeah, yes, I am, and as we did, we didn't start knocking doors until September, but as we got closer and closer to the campaign, people would answer the door and they'd be like, "Oh, it's you," which I, ran for county commission in 2018 and flipped that seat, but that's not very high profile at all. So the fact that my name recognition was built in such a way, it was just so effective. And I actually won with 54% of the vote. And we were hit it hard. We had a very clear strategy with our team. I see some of my teammates on here, Reva, Nate, and Elena, all shouting out Morse Force in the chat. That's what our team name is, the Morse Force, which I got during my breast cancer battle. So we took it on the campaign trail too. Our team just worked so well together, and they were so in tune with what we wanted and what direction we want to go, and the planning from our campaign. They really just listened to what we needed and they put it into action. And I'm sure at some more technical meeting, maybe, some of you have seen the metrics from our campaign, but we had our closeout meeting a couple weeks ago, and it really just blew me away. It just really was incredible. And sure, $75,000 goes pretty far, I'm sure, right? But we are just super grateful for both of our teams that just really worked with us so well. And you know what? We did it here, in the 61st. Now, my race was called for my opponent, the AP, for some strange reason. When there were many, many outstanding absentee ballots, decided to call it. The local paper covered it. My opponent posted it on Facebook. I was blissfully ignorant because I was just looking at the county page, refreshing. And I finally tried to go to bed at 1, but every hour when I would wake up, I would just look at the county site. So I had no idea. Oh, Rob says he went to bed crying. Oh, that's so sweet. But anyway, finally at 4:30 in the morning, it was called for me. So I actually had the MLive reporter, local, reporter call me at 7 and say, "Oh yeah, well, we called it for, the other one, but looks like you won actually." I was like, we all told ourselves we would not know right away, right? But as it turned out, none of us are patient. And the fact that we can see some of those votes is actually so hard. my suggestion next time, just tell us who won. Like, let's not do, we can cut out all the pundits
Yeah.
and just know who won.
I think the entire country can sympathize with that. Although you experience it in a much more personal way.
Yes. Yeah. And so many people were like, wait, did you win? And there's a check mark by her name because it stayed there. The AP left it there till like 10 or 11 in the morning. So people were like, I don't understand, you know. So we like to keep things exciting around here. And that was it too. So again, I mean, just super grateful to all of TFC, everyone who, you know, fundraises on your behalf, all the volunteers, the whole, you know, administration team were so supportive. So thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. So we will take a detour from our Alexis here, going over to Dylan, who talked about some of the texting efforts, and then we'll loop back for a Q&A with the whole crew.
If you have questions, start posting them in Q&A now.
I'm sure people will be waiting on bated breath to hear the answers to those questions, so I'll try and make it quick. So from a GeoTV texting perspective, we focused on 7 battleground states this year, and we were really trying to, in the last 6 weeks, help candidates from Alaska to Florida be able to improve name recognition, improve turnout, both through vote by mail, early voting, and election day. And I think everyone's phones is a perfect example of why this was truly the texting election, because while a lot of people definitely end up opting out or potentially writing a slightly vitriolic response in reaction to receiving their 5th text of the day, texts end up being read very, very often. And they also help you identify who are your strongest supporters and who are the people you probably don't want to follow up with. So that's why from local city council races all the way up to the presidential race, it was imperative that people were texting out the vote this year. If you can go to the next slide, TJ. So we worked with 36 campaigns and had 80 amazing volunteers supporting those candidates. Unlike some of the other projects, we actually had our teams working across multiple campaigns. And what was really great about that is it meant that you could help apply learnings from one campaign in Houston to another campaign and be able to really expand our learning and our impact in a very short amount of time, which was important given that we only had 6 weeks. And at the end of it, we ended up sending 1.1 million texts to voters around the country, which I would definitely say we were focused on quality rather than quantity. So the fact that we got to that level speaks volumes to the work that the volunteers did and also the work of the campaign managers and the candidates themselves. But you're probably wondering, of all those 7 battleground states, which one was most successful in texting out the vote this year? And it wasn't actually close. Pennsylvania consistently had the highest positive engagement across the states in which we worked. And we're still digging into the data there. I think the postmortems that Jessica alluded to earlier will be really help us uncover why that happened. But for now, our theories are really based on a couple of different things. First off, for the campaigns that we worked with in Pennsylvania, they had access to reliable texting platforms, some of which actually let them do A/B testing out of the box, which meant that we could run 2 tests at the same time, figure out which issue resonated most with voters, and then be able to put it into the next week of outreach. On top of that, while every state had advocacy organizations, both locally and nationally, working to try and get out the vote and engage and persuade people, the in-state advocacy groups in Pennsylvania were both flexible and as well as collaborative. So we were able to know when they were going to start texting in a certain area and be able to collaborate with them so that we weren't hammering certain voters too many times. And beyond that, I think vote by mail was brand new for Pennsylvania in this election cycle, which meant when you're reaching out over text to try and give people information on how to vote safely and securely, and the vast majority of the voting population doesn't have the muscle built up yet of how to vote successfully through the mail, it means that you're providing a really critical service right in their pocket. And so that's why we think Pennsylvania was most receptive to it. Not to say that the other states didn't have some amazing success stories there, but consistently across the board, from rural to urban campaigns, we really saw people text out the vote successfully. In practice, learned a couple things. Every week we were running A/B tests, as I mentioned, and you don't really have a ton of canvas with which to work on in texting. Typically, you'll have probably about 160 characters to be considered one text. If you throw an emoji in there, that gets cut by more than half. So you can't really say much, but what you do say does matter. And we found that certain things like social identity messaging, saying like voters like you instead of can we count on your vote, increased positive responses, which likely increased turnout versus baseline GeoTV text by about 2 to 3%. And then we also saw that, like in email marketing, if you switch up the sender identity, so instead of sending it from a volunteer on behalf of Christine Morse, it's literally Christine Morse sending the texts or their campaign manager. While it's not necessarily scalable across tens of thousands of texts, for strategic targeted messaging campaigns, it is really invaluable. We saw in some campaigns 30% positive response rates when that happened. We also had some things where I'd say there's more learning opportunities rather than successes. Texting in other languages, especially in Florida, we realized that it can be an amazingly valuable service. However, the data underlying it really needs to be on point, because if you're texting someone and they don't speak Spanish, but you message them in Spanish, they're not only going to opt out, I think it's very fair of them to be upset with you. So being able to complement and build out the data that's in the databases being used by the candidates is really important before we start doing this again in future cycles. And then the last thing, I think people may have noticed in the past few weeks of the election, but quickly after some phone carriers realized that people were abusing the texting medium, every single text was required to include opt-out instructions, basically saying reply stop to opt-out when you were contacting a voter for the very first time. And we found through our A/B testing that even if you're paying a few extra cents to say something a bit longer, like, hey, by the way, I'm a real person, I'm a volunteer, not just a robot. First off, it might cause people to apologize when they swear. But second off, it might actually engage them more and lead to a much more productive conversation. But all of this, all of these learnings, all of the metrics, as we'll see on the next slide, they don't really come to fruition or mean much at all without the support and help of amazing volunteers. We had, again, 80 volunteers working in really intense 6-week projects, and had a group of super volunteers helping us with everything from learning how to best use the platforms that existed to setting up our dashboards and coming up with the messaging and strategy. So a huge thank you to all of the volunteers who helped make texting out the vote a success in 2020. Cool. With that, I'll turn it back to you, TJ, or Greg.
Yeah, we'll all compete for it.
Yeah.
Cool. So Q&A, we have some good questions coming in, and I will lead off with 2 that I promise we did not plant. One from Chris Henty. What was the single most effective digital activity in your view that TFC aided with in turning out your voters? And the kind of follow-up from Radov, did you see your opponents respond to your improved digital presence? And I will call on Christine because she's unmuted.
All right. Well, I just unmuted. I would say there definitely was a war of the searches. And so there were a couple times when, so for example, my opponent started a website, Extreme Christine, which was like, I'm an extreme socialist, anti-police, whatever, all the negative they were doing on me, extremechristine.com, which I'm actually quite proud of. And anyway, but that would, you know, I would reach out to Reva and be like, hey, did you know Extreme Christine is above me? Like if you search my name. So they were really good and on top of that. And actually for a lot of the time, my name would be above hers when you would search her name. So good on you, team. So that was good. And I would say our creative team was just amazing in creating these ads that were very eye-catching and had a high click rate. Like I'm not a techie, like all these metrics that you all look at, But what I will say is just, it was very engaging, and it again reflected who I am. And people, what is it? There's something about people remembering the
Recall.
recall. That's what I'm looking for. We had very high recall rate, and it's because our ads were so eye-catching. Thank you.
I think
And-
Elena, who created your ads, is with us tonight. So Elena.
And DeAndrea, how did you feel sort of the either single most valuable thing, or how the sort of back and forth happened on your race?
Yeah, absolutely. So for our ads, we actually just used a friend. So a close friend and her husband does a lot of social. And so he just volunteered time. And for our race, we kind of felt like my opponent wasn't going to go hard on that. He had run for a House race 2 years before, and it wasn't a strategy. That assumption proved to be correct. He would just post, but there was no thoughtful marketing approach where he was actually doing any targeted spend or anything of that sort. So we didn't have much competition like that. And then also just to kind of level set, I mean, our race was a flip. But I would say it's much more of a bootstrap flip in that we're not raising like super high amounts. And even for this, like I ran without like a full-time campaign manager or anything. So it was kind of, I think my perspective for flipping the seat here in North Carolina is probably different from some of the larger races, even a few of the ones in NC here.
Dare I suggest the extra money raised from your email program may have been helpful?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. So Carl, I had a question about ticket splitting. So one example was New Hampshire, where the state Senate actually flipped back Republican, but voted for Biden. Obviously, North Carolina was very close, and Michigan was previously very close. So wondering how you all saw your electorate kind of sort out the top of the ticket versus your race and then the conversations you had.
Yeah, here in North Carolina, we had quite a bit of ticket splitting. So for the state, for the presidential election, it went more towards Trump. We have a Democratic governor, Republican lieutenant governor. We have a couple members of Council of State who are Democratic, but then we are holding out hope that our Democratic Supreme Court justice, we're doing a recount and holding out hope that she may be able to retain her seat. So really North Carolina was all over the place, but that has always been true for North Carolina. If you look back many decades, we have a history of our electorate not necessarily sticking with how they vote for the presidential. And I know for a number of legislative seats, we do feel, as you were saying, the turnout for like just those low propensity Republican voters did in our very close races make a big difference. In our race, one benefit for me as well is that I ran in the community that I grew up in. So I had a really unique opportunity to turn out my own low propensity voters, and that we targeted people I went to high school with and like had videos, and we had some really interesting signage at polls, and really leveraged a community-based perspective such that our numbers did have a little bit higher rate than some of the other Democratic candidates on the ballot. But yeah, we had quite a bit of split ticket voting.
We too had split ticket voting. Obviously, we did go for Biden by significant margin, actually. I mean, don't believe everything you see on TV. And our election results will be certified soon. So glad about that. But Fred Upton, 35, whatever, how many ever years Republican in Congress, won very handily despite a good candidate that had been a state rep. John Hoadley, that's really beloved in the Kalamazoo community, but you have the whole rest of, the 6th congressional that you have to deal with. So, the whole of Kalamazoo County went completely Democrat for our county officials. So that was exciting. The sad part, of course, is that we did not get a Dem House majority, although we had huge hopes of just flipping 4 seats. Unfortunately, 2 of the seats that we had flipped back to Republican, which were in Genesee County, which Trump visited twice in the weeks leading up to the election. So again, probably turned out those low propensity Republican voters there. But again, we are a gerrymandered state in terms of our state house. And but in 2022, that will all be different. And we will be redistricted by an independent redistricting commission. So I'm not even sure what my seat's going to look like, but we are not worried about that right now. We're just going to put one foot in front of the other.
Makes sense to me. There's another question about, I guess there's sort of 2 questions that kind of fold into one, which I will ask in the simplest way, especially in the world of digital, but maybe more broadly, knowing what you know now about campaigning and you were starting over and you could roll back the clock, what would you do differently? Get really good at Zoom fundraisers. That's a...
I honestly wouldn't do anything differently, but I benefited from having a #1 flip seat. We raised $526,000, which is insane, from 20,000 contributions across the country. So that is unprecedented. It won't happen again. I think it's just this very special year, and people liked our campaign and felt energized by it. And really all those people who were in safe, districts across the country wanted to invest in, some change in Michigan. And sadly, we didn't get quite there. But I really can't say, other than losing my campaign manager, but then I got a really, really amazing campaign manager. So, maybe everything happens for a reason, and I won. So I'm not sure what I would do differently.
Everything was great. DeAndrea?
I don't know how I would be able to pull this off, but giving myself a little bit more lead time before jumping right into it. I think that was pretty much impossible, but I look forward to, if when I run again, just knowing that it's coming up more than like a week before signing a paper. So.
Cool. And one question for Dylan. Did the Pennsylvania Democratic Party have a role in the texting success, which I think you kind of mentioned with the various coordination groups that you were able to do?
Yeah, we worked really closely with the HDCC in Pennsylvania, and
which is
that
House.
Sorry, say that again.
House Democratic Caucus.
Oh yes, yeah, the House Democratic Caucus, and worked with Gavin, and they were absolutely amazing. So we were able to get really timely updates on the voter information, as well as what was happening with each campaign, and that was quite instrumental in success there.
Cool. How much time we have? TJ, how are we doing on time?
We have a few minutes left.
Cool. One additional question on fundraising, and it's sort of maybe a grab bag for everybody. How big of an impact do you think fundraising has on state races? One of the narratives from some of those House and Senate races was that heavily funded candidates didn't do well, which my own thought is there's a sort of difference between heavily funded and likely to work.
Yeah.
That there's, sometimes you have stories like Christine's, where there's an awesome candidate in a really close district, and then the money goes to a good place, and sometimes they don't quite meet.
I want to let the Christine and DeAndrea answer, but I also want to say it's not because they were heavily funded that they didn't do well. There's not a causation there. They weren't expected to do well, but we funded them anyway. And I think the conversation, and we were actually talking about this before the call, is like just donors being able to understand ROI a lot better instead of just what I call rage giving. So Amy McGrath, lovely person, really didn't have a chance. So giving her $100 million didn't make a lot of sense. So, and there's an exponential difference between what we're talking about here. We had 2 US Senate races who raised $200 million and lost by a combined 30 points. Christine's race was the most expensive House race in Michigan, and it was $500,000. So just want to like give people some perspective here about the levels we're talking about, and what is like causation and what's correlation. I'll let Christine and DeAndrea, who fundraised for their races, talk more about it. But I just want to clarify that it's not because they raised a lot that they didn't win. It's that they probably weren't going to win and we overfunded them. Do you guys want to chime in? Sorry, I feel very strongly
yeah.
about
I mean, as for that theory, I don't know, but I'm a person, I mean, I lived on an anxiety level of about 95%, starting in, July of 2019. And I call myself a slacker, but if given instruction, I will do what I'm told. And so, I mean, we started phone banking in May and we didn't stop. I mean, our campaign alone made 175,000 calls, attempts. And we, in just 2 months, we started knocking doors after Labor Day, 25,000 doors. So I knew I had to work to win, and I knew my opponent was working. So for me, it wasn't a question. The money though, I mean, so the caucus helped us out significantly. I mean, they also spent almost $1 million or maybe $1 million on my race. And they were buying the TV initially, but we also at one point sent another $150,000 for TV, and people were like, "Oh my God, you're a deluge on my TV." That is, and I worried about like, where are we at the point of saturation, and at what point, is it, we're losing our effectiveness because it's just we're spending so much, but. Again, when you win, it's hard to know the answer to that question because we did all we could, between virtual fundraisers, email, and we just had so many organizations, Sister District, Indivisible Chicago, Daily Cause, the Flip for Michigan, all these different organizations that were funneling money our way. And so we just were very fortunate.
And DeAndrea, for the bootstrap perspective.
I mean, our race was pretty, I think for a first-time candidate, especially because very similar to anyone in the tech space will know that it can be incredibly difficult for folks of diverse backgrounds to also raise. So not being a top flip seat, and also coming from a background where my dad never went to college, actually was like formerly incarcerated, and my mom also never went. Like our personal networks that I'm starting from is just can be different, especially if you still have support, but maybe not financial support. So we raised about 140,000, and super thankful for all the folks that came in and helped our campaign for that. And I will say that, yeah, I mean, those dollars do make a lot of difference, because in the case that you are doing the ads, or you are paying for texting services, or needing to host Zoom, and you find that the 100 person limit is not going to work because you got a bunch of interest, those things really add up quickly. Especially we came up with some cool ways at the polls to have QR codes on like giant posters that would go to the video on our website that they could look at while they're in line. And we did all these kind of engaging things that like little by little would add up. So I would say that, yeah, it's kind of the scale. Those big races, every single dollar that was going into it counted. And even for my race being a flip seat, we took a portion of what we were fundraising and gave it to the party, because we knew that additional piece of mail or being able to send out another type of digital engagement could make the difference in all of the seats that we were hoping to flip. So it was very much a team effort statewide. But yeah, I think it goes to, as Jessica was mentioning, maybe we were just overfunding races that we should have been maybe looking at even more legislative races where, those donations can make a huge difference and, can like be night and day just to get that kind of support.
Dylan, there's a question of what's the name of the texting platform where you can run A/B testing?
Spoke, the cheapest of them all. In fact.
But also we ran our own.
Yeah, and there's ways you can do it to kind of jerry rig the platforms to make it happen anyways.
Yeah, but mostly we run our own that way. So Dylan had, I think, 6 different platforms?
Yeah, there was a lot that popped up since 2018.
Yeah. So we were really running our own A/B testing. We had been doing that since 2018, where we saw that the messaging matters. And so we'll test in a cohort and then double down on that for a broader group and a text wave. Before we end, I know we just have a couple minutes left, and Rob and T, hopefully you saw that you'll be the judges of the best question to get the t-shirt. But Christine and DeAndrea, I know you're both, in addition to being representative-elects and senator-elects and entrepreneurs, I know you're both moms. So we were wondering, what was the reaction your kids had when you won?
So I have, my two sons have very different personalities, so their reactions were very different. I am very fortunate that by the end of the night, we knew that I won my race. And my oldest son is very cautious. And he was like, I just thought you were going to lose. I was just thinking about it all. Like, he said, this went much better than expected, like much better. And then my 4-year-old is more of like, game time. So he just was like fist pumping, like super excited. Like we won the campaign. He was my, I kind of laughed. I said I didn't really have a campaign manager. My 4-year-old Cyrus is my campaign manager. If I would come downstairs, Cyrus would be like, Mommy, you need to go back to the office and do your calls because you need to win. So they were all in this entire year for me running for office. And we watched like the What is a Bill kind of Schoolhouse Rock thing to try to explain it to them. Yeah, so they were so stoked. And it was really great to be able to share that with them.
That's awesome. At least, did he tell you that he didn't think you would win only after you won?
No, he did say it about a week before. Oh. And I was like, we're just gonna like knock on all the wood and keep focused.
I thought at least he waited till afterwards. Christine, what did your kids say?
So I have a 19-year-old son and a 17-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old daughter, who again are all very different. And we didn't know till the next morning. So my 19-year-old had like gone to work, and I don't think I even talked to him because I was sort of like shell-shocked and tired, and he's like in and out at 8 o'clock in the morning. But he came home at lunch and I was like, well, I won. He's like, cool. And then the 17-year-old, I went and woke her up in the morning for virtual school. And I was like, I won. And she screamed and she was so excited. And that she's like, on Instagram and whatever, The 10-year-old was like, so this means you're going to have a job now? Like a full-time job? She's been very anti the entire time. I mean, I'm sure she's proud of me, but she does not want mom to have a full-time job. So it's all good. I mean, she's happy. I'm sort of kidding, but sort of not. So, it's just so weird when you have to wait till the next day and you haven't slept all night. And then, it's just not like you can celebrate. It's just so weird, but maybe next time for me, that's how it will happen.
Yeah. Well, maybe the 10-year-old's upset because you're going to have more followers than she has. You never know.
Let's hope so.
Well, we really appreciate you guys joining. We're so proud of you and proud to have been a part in this, and of course want to keep working with you. So thank you guys. TJ, do we have anything else?
No, I think T and Rob, have you chosen a winner?
We did. And it's not because he's wearing a Morse Force shirt. But Nate is our winner.
All right, Nate, congratulations.
Congratulations.
We'll hit you up on Slack. Thank you guys so much. And thanks to all the volunteers, and also a very big reminder to thank the TFC staff who some are staying on, and some of the state directors are going back to tech. So make sure that you thank them, in the next few days. There's, of course, will be 2021 opportunities to be involved and volunteer. So stay tuned and have a very, very happy Thanksgiving with a very small group. Thanks, guys.